item 2 is pretty simple because there's no apologies for absence, unless there's any officers who need to give apologies, which I don't think there is because everyone's here. Item 3 then is declaration of interests.
Thank you, Lisa. I have no particular advice this morning, but I have been advised of 2 declarations. Councillor Gordon, can you please confirm that you have a personal interest in agenda item 6 as your Chair of Governors?
Yeah, that's right. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And Councillor Morgan, I understand that you have a personal interest in agenda item 7 as your private landlord. Is that correct? Thank you very much. Members, if anything else arises during debates, then please make declaration at that time. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Anything else to add there? No, everyone happy? In which case we can move on to item number 4, which is confirmation of the minutes from the 22nd of November last year. Any issues arising from those minutes? Everyone happy with those? Great. On to item 5 then, which is update on actions. Any actions to update on or outstanding from those? No, if not, we move on to agenda item 6, which is the financial monitoring for 22-23, that's the current financial year, and the revenue budget for 23-24, which is the next financial year. And if I initially hand over to Sue.
Thank you, Leader. So this report comes at a very important moment for the Council. The external context for people in Torfaen and their families is a serious one, as we all know. Inflation at record levels, fuel costs, housing-related costs, unmanageable for very many. And we've had a very cold December, followed by a very wet January, putting more pressure on services, but most of all, a serious Tory government-induced crisis in health and social care that is leaving every family feeling vulnerable, and those who've got health concerns for themselves or their loved ones, frankly, scared. So that's the backdrop to this report, not the most inspiring. With spiralling costs also affecting every aspect of council services and real rocketing pressures in areas, the outlook is a worrying one, as we seek to support people in greater levels of need with resources that just don't stretch as far. When we last considered the financial forecast for 22-23, we paid tribute to the steady financial management in the council that has led us to expect that council spending for 22-23 would come in under budget. But the estimated position for 23-24, like local authorities across the UK, was looking serious, with a gap of 12.5 million in what was needed just to stand still. This report today, I'm glad to say, offers some chink of light in a gloomy picture. There's now good reason to be confident that despite these enormous and almost unprecedented challenges, this council is able to mitigate the worst of those pressures without cutting services and with only the minimal and planned increase in council tax. In rough terms, around half of the forecasted 23-24 gap has been met by prudent financial management, including the use of reserves, reviewing initial estimates and service redesign, leading to around 6 million improvement on the original spending estimates. The remainder has been met through a significantly improved Welsh Government settlement. As you know, we'd already agreed that our council tax increase will be limited to 1.95% as promised, in recognition that residents also have huge challenges with the rising cost of living. And this increase supports our county plan to focus resources on improving the well-being of those residents, tackling inequalities and addressing environmental challenges in our county. In introducing the report, I want to highlight the tremendous spending discipline and corporate prudence that's led to an even better end-of-year forecast for 22-23, which is very good news. In June, you'll remember the forecast position was $500,000 in black. Today that stands at 2.5 million. Nigel will take us through the detail at service level. But of course, some of this change is a result of cautious forecasting and service planning alongside receipts of additional income. Sadly, some is due to the challenges we face in filling vacancies in key areas, such as social care. Challenges that, in my view, are down to this Tory government's callous disregard for a service that's been long recognised as essential to supporting well-being and effective healthcare systems. This is a theme I'm pretty sure my colleague Dave Daniels will want to explore. However, much of the improvement on closing this gap is due to the dedication of our staff, guided by excellent financial management support from Nigel, Dave and colleagues. They know the importance of making every pound count, and I want to extend our thanks to them for their professionalism and their restraint. Turning to the estimates of the 23-24 financial year, members will be aware that historically the locally raised element of the Council's annual budget amounts to just 24% council tax, fees and charges. The Welsh Government annual settlement is therefore crucial in determining the budget. Based on our previous expectations, the position was looking serious for Torfaen, though much more so for many other authorities in Wales. And the position for many English local authorities has long been bordering on untenable. As I've mentioned, the Council's provisional settlement received in December from the Welsh Government provided a financial boost above and beyond their early indications, and that now allows the Council to move towards a balanced position for 23-24. The Council received a 12 million or a 7.5% uplift on its 22-23 settlement, which has given us 6.5 million more than estimated in the last report. This will help us meet the huge pressures in budgets this year, including, for example, nearly 4 million of rises in energy costs across council buildings, including schools. Though it doesn't match the current level of inflationary pressures, some of which we expect to be relatively short-lived, it does allow us to mitigate the worst impacts. It is clear, though, and I can't stress this enough, that 23-24 pay inflation will have to be met from this allocation. In headline terms, and Nigel will go through the detail, no big shifts in grant funding appear to be affecting us, though we'll have to work through the detail at individual grant level. And unrestricted capital funding increases to 5.41 million and is expected to be maintained in the following year at that level. The current indications of the settlement uplift for 24-25 is just over 3%, which again is marginally improved on what we were expecting. Finally, I want to outline the position on council reserves. The principle that we use reserves to support non-recurring costs is absolutely vital to good financial management. And while the estimates currently predict a 4.774 million draw on reserves, the expected spike in energy and fuel costs accounts for well over half of that sum. Cushioning the impact of school pay inflation from education reserves in the short term is also an appropriate use. However, the predicted underspend for 22-23 does allow this council scope for decisions around the extent to which it wishes to draw down reserves and to weigh its policy objectives with some degree of flexibility, which again is good news. I want to thank the Cross-Cutting Resources Scrutiny Committee for their thorough and very helpful contribution to the process so far, and look forward to working with them further on the budget setting process. And with that, I'll hand over to Nigel. Thank you.
Thank you, Executive Member. I won't go through all the detail in the report. The Executive Member has covered the sort of, a lot of it, but I will canter through. But just sort of by way of introduction, as everyone on the Cabinet will know, my style has always been to be very calm. That's the approach we take in terms of financial management. And we've gone through many, many difficult budgets by approaching it in a very calm way. It was probably even more important in this round when there was, an awful lot of anxiety, across Wales over, rising inflation and a potential settlement uplift. And the leader's always stressed that he doesn't want too many decisions or too much direction until we know the provisional settlement, until you know what you're actually dealing with. And I would suggest to members that that's been a sound approach again in terms of this budget round when we look at what's come out perhaps from other authorities. This report has already received some coverage in the Argus over the weekend. And generally balanced. In terms of 2022-23, yes, it's an improving picture. I would like to think it will continue to improve as we move towards the year end. All services are looking, where possible, to rein in expenditure where it's sensible to do so, to protect our financial sustainability. and obviously help with our reserve position. And we could be in a position at the end of the year where the call on reserves in 23-24 is offset by what we'll be able to put into reserves in 22-23. I think that's a healthy position for us to be in as a council. As the executive member has said, not all the underspends are coming from, reasons that we would see as beneficial, vacancies and that kind of stuff. But there is evidence within all services of the good financial discipline and having an eye on next year as we approach and as we manage this year. I would also say the decision that you as members took on pay in 22-23 budget to allow a pay contingency and to allow us to meet the pay award still bears fruit, both in terms of this position and in terms of the recurrence into the following years. If we look on the services, all the reasons are there within the report, but in the two big areas within education, it's around change management and placements and commissioning, contributing to the underspend, offset by some pressure within transport, and in social care and housing, it's predominantly adults and the vacancies and increased forecast for client income that are driving the position. So the report then takes members through the provisional settlement, the headlines of which have all been covered, and I will stress what the executive member said on pay. The Minister has made it quite clear in the letter and quite clear when ever she speaks that there is no more money for pay. Therefore, we have to take that into account as we finally set the budget. Capital was up slightly on where we expected it to be by a little over £900,000, and there's obviously some support in there for business. So in terms of then how we've moved it from 12.5 million to where we are now, 6.1 takes members through all the things we've done in conjunction with services and service chief officers. And I always do comment on the very corporate way this authority has always approached the budget and the support I always get from each chief officer in looking to address the situations. We don't have any problems there. So they're listed in there. There's a range of measures from rebasing estimates to looking to fund where it's appropriate from reserves, to simply estimates changing with the passage of time. Estimates are dynamic. You shouldn't be just setting a budget based on a set of numbers you prepare early in September and October. There are no service or no significant service implications from any of those there, and they've all been agreed with the chief officers. Then there are a set of corporate, we call them just corporate proposals because they cut across. Obviously, you had the council tax base, only a marginal increase, but it's still an increase. The South Wales Fire Authority came in slightly less than we originally anticipated, although it's still an 8% or over an 8% increase year on year. Obviously, we benefit from the national insurance reduction as an employer. The next one, the original energy forecasts, we've rebased them. There are two then around use of reserves for energy. We made quite an early decision in terms of planning that we didn't know whether energy was a spike or a curve, and therefore that is an appropriate use of reserves. We rarely use reserves in terms of budget planning in Torfaen, but that was a very early decision, and it took a lot of the heat away from and the angst around energy, and then we set off packets of work to try and make sure that by 24-25 those aren't pressures we'll face. Interest rates are going up. That does give us additional investment income. And we rescheduled a loan, and that's given us some extra money. And then there's a couple of others then from reserves. So all of that gets us very close to a balanced position. then 6.3 are things that we need to consider. We do need to be mindful of the minister's announcement on pay, and I'm suggesting in this report, and this does follow conversations I've had with the executive member and with the leader, that we put in an assumption of 5.5% rather than the original assumption of 4%. It feels reasonable. It feels in the ballpark of where it may end up. I haven't got a crystal ball. I don't know where it's going to end up, but that's an affordable level, and hopefully, if it's slightly less than that, we'll have some headroom. If it's slightly more than that, well, we've narrowed the gap that we've got to fund. And then I would suggest, in terms of any other headroom that's left after that, the first port of call would be to look at those areas we are funding from reserves and see whether we should use some of that funding to take away that requirement from reserves. So when you bring all of that together, we're nearly, well, the table shows a balanced position, but we've got some decisions to make, on the headroom. So we're getting close to a balanced position, which I think is a very good position to be in. We've put in 7 where we've taken what we're funding from reserves, and we are going to, as part of finalising the budget, look to review and rationalise reserves to make sure that they are fit for purpose and can be used for the benefit of the whole authority. I've listed then the scrutiny recommendations and our responses to those, and then there's the inevitable section on risks. So, I mean, I conclude to say we've got a good position for 22-23. I'd like to think it'll improve a little bit more before the end of the year. I think we're in a good position for 23-24. I still think your early decision on council tax has yielded us, benefits in that certainty. But obviously the challenges going forward do remain. It doesn't get any easier beyond 23-24, and so Project Apollo will still be required to, bring in and deliver significant efficiencies and changes. What this budget allows is just time for those to be done in a measured and proportionate way, while still significant, rather than having to be implemented by the 1st of April 2023, which would have been more challenging, but no less important. And I think that's sufficient, Leader.
Great. Well, thank you both, and thank you both for the huge amount of work that's gone into this. I'd like to thank Sue and her officers, Nigel and Dave Lillies in the Chamber, and other officers, both in resources and, as you say, throughout the Council, for the calm and considered way that they've dealt with this budget process. I think it really is testament to both the work that they do and the spirit in which we enter budget negotiations. It's very easy in an organisation like this that does many things for each part of the organisation to play off against each other in a battle for very scarce resources, and that's not what happens in this authority. And I think that's to the benefit of everyone who we serve, as well as those who work in the authority. So I'd like to thank them for the tone that they set, as well as the work that they do in here. I'd also like to extend share those thanks to Welsh Government. That the settlement, of course, won't meet the entirety of the challenge that we face, but it does at least give us a fighting chance, and it shows, I think, that Welsh Government do recognise the value of local services, the services we provide, and I think we have to continually remember that this isn't about council funding. This is about funding for schools, this is about funding for children's services, this is about funding for adult social care, this is about funding for neighbourhood services in our local environments, and all the things that people rely on for their day-to-day lives. These are very important things. The education of our children, for example, hugely important issues, and that's what funding for local government is about. It's not about funding for councils as bureaucracies in themselves. It's about the things that we do and the difference that those services and the people who work in them make to people's lives. So I think it's always worth remembering that. I'm certainly pleased in saying that I'm a council leader in Wales and not perhaps in England or Scotland, facing the difficulties they're facing. They face the same huge pressures that we face. We talked about them before. You know, a nearly £4 million increase in energy costs, a nearly £4 million increase in social care contracting costs, £7 million increase in pay costs. They're facing those same pressures, but without a government that understands the pressures they're facing and wants to work with them to try and meet those pressures and to safeguard services. I am pleased that we've managed to make a pay settlement this year in recognition of the huge amounts of work that our staff do. Local government staff really are some of the unsung heroes of our public services. A lot of the survival story of councils through the first period of austerity, of course, was the tremendous sacrifice made by our members of staff, who saw their workloads increase and their pay go down by 20% in real terms over the past decade. I'm certainly of the firm belief that that can't continue and that they deserve fair pay settlements. But at the same time, of course, we're the ones who have to make the budget balance. So I'm pleased that a pay settlement was reached this year that managed to balance those off against each other, and hopefully that will be the way that we continue moving forwards. So very much welcome the investment that Welsh Government is making in the services we provide. Of course, Welsh Government have also realised in doing that they have to fund the health system and not just the health service. The services that we provide in social care, housing and communities, are the services that are early intervention prevention services that keep people out of the acute services that are under so much pressure. There is no route to solving the issues in our NHS across the UK that doesn't go through a proper settlement for social care. And I think that's something that Welsh Government recognise and are working with us to address. Secondly, I'd just like to say I fully recognise that we have to make the best use of the good situation that we've created for ourselves when looking to the 5-year plan and the medium-term financial plan as part of our county plan for the area. It's key that we give a balanced message today, that we are managed to reach a balanced position, but that doesn't mean that it's been easy, and it doesn't mean that there won't be tough choices and challenges facing us. Sue and Nigel described some of those challenges, pay and non-pay inflation. Things are very uncertain at the moment generally, but I think if we take that same calm approach and if we use this time wisely, then we can really make a good fist of addressing those challenges. Council tax, of course, is always a difficult decision. I'm pleased we've managed to limit the rise, an inflationary rise this year, or one that was around the rate of inflation of 10, 11, 12% that we've seen in recent months, would have really been a difficult pill to swallow for households who are already facing rising costs in things like energy, that's rent or mortgages in many respects. So I'm glad that we've been able to limit that rise in recognition of the cost of living crisis, whilst also, of course, providing the other thing that we have to balance, which is the continuation of local services. So I really welcome that approach. I also welcome the input of members across the council. Nigel mentioned scrutiny and the recommendations. I'm really pleased that they've been able to have early sight of the budget at different stages, and I know that will continue as we work towards the final budget in February and March of this year. I think the input that members can get as we're trying to grapple with the challenges that we face is very important. And so just thank you both for the work that's gone into reaching this position. It's not something that I take for granted as leader, the work that you do and the tone you set across this council. Any questions, colleagues, before we move to the recommendations? Fiona?
Yeah, I just want to make a statement. As in previous years, I've been the one who's had to explain why we've been over budget in children's services, and it's pleasing to see that even if it's only by a small amount, that we're actually under budget. But it's more about the message that sends. We are changing the culture so that it shuts that front door of children coming into care and how we actually support families, and changing the whole way that hopefully, as Anthony has alluded to with early intervention and prevention, is preventing those families hitting crisis. And so, yeah, I just really wanted to thank the service for making sure that achieving an underspend there because of the lack of placements. and that we are continuing to work on that piece of work.
Thank you, Fiona. That balanced position that we've reached in Children's Services is very welcome, both, I think, for financial reasons for the Council, but also because I think following those principles of early intervention and prevention under the Future Generations Act, I think is better in terms of outcomes for the people we serve as well. So that's welcome on both fronts. Any other questions? David?
Yeah, opposite circumstances in adult services, unfortunately. And I say this every time, and it feels like a standing item thing, but, you know, the underspend in adult services is not a good thing. You know, it's us unable to commission, it's us unable to get staff to provide support for people in need, really. And I feel also obliged to say that recent guidance around discharging from hospitals is not going to speed that thing up. We're not going to be allocating packages to individuals any faster, discharging them or not. It just places them in a position of risk. I'd like to echo what the leaders said, which is that this is a health and social care crisis, not just a health crisis. It's obviously Welsh Government they have their limitations. This is a UK-wide issue, not just a Wales issue. We do need UK Government to do the right thing on social care. We've been waiting many, many years, if not decades, for them to really grab the bull by the horns on social care. We're still waiting now with no potential plans. So that really hinders Welsh Government's ability to do a real kind of revolutionary change in the social care system. But, you know, I think it's important to say that you can't solve the crisis in the NHS without first solving the social care crisis too. So it's very much just a statement, but I feel like I need to make that statement.
Thank you, David. Back to Sue.
Thanks for that, Dave. I just want to stress that that underspend in adult social care gives us no pleasure at all in terms of managing the budget, and that were solutions forthcoming which would use that budgeted allocation to meet those needs and help support that struggling system, no one would be more delighted.
Thank you. Any more questions before we move to the recommendations? Okay, the recommendations are at paragraph 12.1. It's recommended that Cabinet notes the current year forecast, notes the provisional settlement announced as it affects Torfaen County Borough Council, endorses the measures currently proposed to address the forecasted 23-24 position, agrees the responses to the recommendations made by Cross-Cutting Resources and Business Overview and Scrutiny Committee, and lastly notes the timetable for the remainder of the 23-24 budget cycle. Are we all in agreement? That's carried. Thank you, Sue, thank you, Nigel, and thank you everyone who's played a part in that. Okay, if we move then to item 7, which is the report on EcoFlex, and if I hand over initially to Mandy.
Thank you, Leader. The UK Government made a requirement for energy companies to support households in fuel poverty and to reduce carbon emissions with housing stock by installing energy efficiency measures. This report is to inform you about a new energy efficiency improvement scheme via Energy Obligation 4 Local Authority Eligibility Flexibility Scheme known as EcoFlex 4. There's a cost of living crisis and a declared climate emergency, and energy costs are on everyone's minds at the moment, and I'm really pleased that we're able to discuss an approach which will allow us to work with a chosen energy provider to target our most vulnerable households in Torfaen, whether they own their property or whether they're in private rented properties. By investing in energy efficiency measures, it will help reduce their costs and help to decarbonise Torfaen. It's been agreed by Cardiff Capital Regional Cabinet that CCR will take the lead on implementing EcoFlex 4 through a procurement of energy providers who will be appointed and will deliver locally. Our role as a local authority is minimal. The householder and the energy company will do most of the heavy lifting. Our role will be to identify households, give them advice and build up the confidence in the scheme. We will work with our strategic partners, including the Health Board and voluntary sector. We need to make them aware of the scheme so they can use the scheme, and they will then help alleviate health conditions caused by cold housing. I'll now hand you over to John Clements, our Team Manager for Environmental Health, who can go through the report in more detail and the next steps going forward and answer any more questions.
Thanks, Mandy. The report presented to exec members today is to inform you about the new Energy Efficiency Improvement Scheme and to seek approval on the recommended proposals for implementing the scheme in Torfaen. The full title of the scheme is Energy Company Obligation for Local Authority Eligibility Flexibility Scheme, but otherwise known as EcoFlex 4, thankfully. In providing a summary of the report, I'll explain briefly what the scheme is, how it operates, how it aligns with wellbeing objectives, the risks associated with the scheme, how we ensure optimum take-up of the scheme, which I think is crucial, and measuring performance. The scheme is now in its fourth iteration. EcoFlex 4 is a 4-year scheme, and it started in April last year, and it runs through to the 31st of March 2026. The main objective of the scheme is to improve the energy efficiency of housing stock occupied by low-income and vulnerable groups. In terms of how it operates, so a property must have an EPC rating of D, E, F or G. And the energy supplier supports the applicant through the process, and the local authority receives a referral to review the application to ensure the eligibility criteria is met, and then will issue a signed declaration back to the energy supplier. On approval, the energy provider commissions and manages the work. To qualify, the applicant must be a homeowner or a private tenant and meet the criteria such as having a low EPC rating, a low annual household income, have a health condition or at an age that puts them at greater risk from effects of living in a cold home, or a household member claiming welfare benefit. How does it align with the wellbeing objectives? The scheme fully supports the Wellbeing and Future Generations Act through improving housing conditions, delivering on carbon and helping to alleviate fuel poverty. In terms of the risks associated with the scheme, the risks are low for the local authority, as the energy suppliers are responsible for the scheme and the quality of the works that are undertaken. No additional funding is required or provided by the local authority, as the scheme is funded directly by the energy supplier. There is an administration fee that would be payable to the local authority from the energy provider for reviewing each application for eligibility. The application review process by the local authority is purely desktop. There's no inspection required. It's a verification exercise, i.e. that the application meets the criteria. The cost of promotion and engagement with partners will be achieved through existing budget and resources. How do we ensure there is optimum take-up of the scheme? Well, our aim will be to make the scheme well known to owner-occupiers and private tenants as part of our ongoing messaging. We need to make every contact count with the authority in terms of the scheme, linking in with social care and housing, and more widely to advertise and promote the scheme to maximise take-up. And we'll look to engage with partners through, for example, the Community Resilience Group, to reach those communities that are often least engaged with the energy market. We'll look to utilise coordinated publicity material provided in agreement by Cardiff Capital Region to promote the scheme. And a bespoke web page will be created for signposting. A marketing campaign developed to include, for example, social media, possibly use of videos, articles in the printed press and letter drops, marketing materials in libraries, and briefing to customer care staff. Locally, we can use intel such as private water supply database to identify off-grid properties that might well fit the criteria. How do we measure performance? The energy supplier is required to report on the number of installations and the types of measures installed within Torfaen to the council on a monthly basis. And the project governance will be provided by Cardiff Capital Region through the EcoFlex working group. So the recommendation to Cabinet is to approve the recommended proposals for implementing the scheme, including the Statement of Intent and the Memorandum of Understanding.
Thank you both. This seems to me like a real opportunity both to tackle some of the issues with with getting to net zero, to provide employment and economic activity, and also to address the cost of living issues that so many people are facing with increasing proportions of their income being taken up by energy costs. Any questions or comments? Fiona?
Well, I was going to ask, what was the communication plan, or would there be a communication plan? But you did specify quite a number of things. So I will ask then, when can residents expect to start seeing that publication, and in how much detail?
Sorry. In terms of the time frames, I can't give you a timescale at this moment, but I will come back to you on that in terms of when it's likely to kick in, when it's likely to start. I don't want to, give an answer that wouldn't be accurate. So I think until that's decided, I'd like to come back to you if I may.
Yeah, absolutely. With your permission there, and leader to come back. It's really important that our residents find the most accessible information so that they actually start to then seeking it out. So I think there's obviously a priority to make sure that's promoted. But I'd like to say I've seen this scheme before, I've seen how well it's worked, and it's really good that this is going forward. So thank you for your report, Mandy.
Great. Okay, so any other questions? Sue?
Apologies if this is in the report and I've just forgotten and can't find it, but in para 4.1 it talks about the Old Gwent region identifying a single prime supplier to deliver the scheme. Is that still in hand? Is that process still going on, or has the supply been identified?
The supplier has been identified. It's a company called Zest.
Great. Any more questions? I know we've got a slight amendment to the wording of the recommendation that should now read that Cabinet approves the proposals for implementing the Local Authority Flex Eco4 Energy Improvement Scheme, and secondly, delegates approval to the Strategic Director Economy Environment to finalise and authorise a statement of intent and member of understanding with EDF Energy, who have been appointed to work within the Gwent region for this scheme. So are we happy with that revised recommendation? Everyone in favour? That's carried unanimously. Thank you, colleagues, and thank you for your work on this. And that closes today's Cabinet meeting.